Palestine is not a political project. We are not a political project. We are a nation. We are indigenous. We are a people group that is deeply rooted in the land that we live in. We are a people that are committed to this land. We are people that are committed to a culture, to a tradition, to a way of life that we have inherited over hundreds and hundreds of years.
So to call it a conflict really disempowers the Palestinians. It isn't all, and you can't get to to the resolution of it in that way because, first of all, it raises Zionism to the level of a side. Well, a side is legitimate. I mean, now you go into conflict resolution, the sides talk to each other, and what do you have to do? Negotiate and compromise. Well, Zionism should not be a side in the first place. Colonialism in any form is unjust, it's immoral, it's illegal. And it can't be raised to be a legitimate side. And what the conflict model also does then on the other side, on the other hand, is to reduce the Palestinians to a side. So here's a people living in its own country, going about its daily affairs with inalienable rights to its own land, to its life, and actually, after World War I and after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, it had its rights to self-determination. Woodrow Wilson articulated that at Versailles. That became the whole principle of the post-colonial world. These are inalienable rights. What does that mean? It means they're non-negotiable. The rights that you have. As a matter of fact, you know that in international law, you are forbidden to abrogate your own rights. So if you get into a situation like, for example, Oslo that Sami mentioned, and being the weak side, of course, the Palestinians are forced to compromise. All right, only 10,000 refugees might return and older people. All right, we give up 78% of our country, and that's the state of Israel. All right, we won't take East Jerusalem. Like, we recognize that that's Israel. In other words, what you're forcing people to do is abrogate their own rights. None of those things should be compromised, should be negotiated, whatsoever. And so that's the problem with conflict. And even Palestinians use the term conflict, which is self-defeating. So, it might sound academic to talk about conceptual frameworks and naming things, but it's so crucial because otherwise you can't get a grasp on it. You don't know where to go. So, for example, and here I want to share a slide with you because I'm an academic, so that's what academics do. That really tries to visualize what I mean by where we are in the struggle. See, this is crucial. You can't know where you are. Are you in the middle of the struggle? Are you at the beginning? What do you have to do? What's going to happen? You can't anticipate. You can't plan. You can't strategize unless you have a concept of what the struggle is, what the system is, and where you are and how to react. Because settler colonialism is a system. It has a logic, it has structures, it has a purpose, it has goals, it has processes that it goes through. It's a process. It isn't just a bunch of things happening and you react to everything. There is a process of settler colonialism all over the world. And and let's just say really quickly, in Palestine, there's three stages, let's say. One of them is the Judaization of Palestine, that goes from the very beginning of Zionism until today, meaning transforming Palestine from an Arab country to a Jewish country. This is the very purpose of Zionism. And the flip side of that is obviously de-Arabization. So you have genocide built into settler colonialism because you can't take over another people's country and take its lands, which means you have to displace them. You can't even recognize their existence because if Zionism recognized the existence of a Palestinian people, it would somehow have to deal with the fact that, wait a minute, maybe they do have rights. I mean, they're here. And the whole claim of Zionism that this is a land without a people, that this country belongs exclusively to the Jewish people, and there is no one else here, can't be maintained the second you recognize as a Palestinian people. So erasure and genocide are built into this process. And that's the process. Okay, now where we are, then you have to go to, let's say, the third stage. I'll go to the final stage for a second. And the final stage is called normalization. In other words, the whole idea of settler colonialism is at some point you've taken over the country, you've made it into your own image. Palestine becomes Israel. It's on Google Maps as Israel. You know, Netanyahu gets up at the UN and shows a map of Israel and the Middle East with no Palestine, right? And that's the end of settler colonialism. It has an end. Its end is to erase itself. Because settler colonialism obviously means there's outsiders in someone else's country doing something, taking it over. Once it's normalized, that's gone. Now it is that country. In other words, it isn't a process in which Zionism is taking over Palestine. It's a situation, it's a condition, it's a state in which Palestine is Israel. There is no more Palestine, you see? And that's normalized. And the Abraham Accords are exactly that. That's the normalization process. It becomes a greater Israel, becomes recognized by the Arab states, and then by the international community. And that's the end. And it's the end also, in some ways, to Palestinian struggle, because after normalization, there's very little political space. Normalization is normalization, it's normal. And so the Palestinians will then come and say, well, what about our rights? And the answer is going to be, sorry, it's normalized, we've moved on. And just to take another second, you know, but the step before that, the prerequisite for normalization is pacification in a military sense. All native resistance, all Palestinian resistance has to be broken before the normalization process can actually continue. And this is the problem that the Arab countries have. Their populations 100% support the Palestinians. The international community, the peoples, support the Palestinians. So that if there's any hint of resistance, if there's any hint that actually this isn't normal, that Palestine isn't Israel, that there are, you know, that half the population of Palestine is resisting its takeover and saying no, then you can't go ahead with normalization. You need a period of industrial quiet before normalization can go ahead against the wishes of the Palestinian population. And that's where we are today. That explains Gaza, the attack and the military destruction of the last bastion of resistance to Zionism on the part of the Palestinians, which is Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. That explains Iran, which was the only major Muslim state to support the Palestinians in very material and concrete ways and political ways. It explains the attacks on Hezbollah. In other words, once that pacification happens, then we go on to normalization. So what I'm trying to urge us all is to understand where we are. We're at a very late stage. This is urgent. There's an urgency here that I often don't have. I went into there's I'm not going to criticize any group, but there's a group called the Palestine Strategy Group in Ramallah. And they put out a plan last year, a couple of years ago, called Palestine 3030. You often look at Palestinian groups that have 5-year plans and 10-year plans. But, that means that they don't know really where we are in the struggle, how urgent it is, and how towards the end of it. So if you look at this chart, then you see that we're in between pacification and normalization. That's where we are, very late. And the Palestinians are a step or two behind. They're still resisting, although that resistance gets weaker because of this pacification process. And they're at the stage of having to summon the power in order to return to an anti-colonial struggle, because where the PLO failed them completely in 1988, you can't blame them maybe because of all the external forces that were on them, but they gave up the anti-colonial struggle in 1988 and went into a conflict mode. Negotiations, two states, Oslo. And like Sami says, that's really what destroyed the Palestinian movement. Now the Palestinians have to go back to an anti-colonial struggle. They have to get a strategy of summoning the power and the organization and the leadership. So they're in between a weaker resistance and the need to really get their house together and formulate a very strong anti-colonial movement. So that's going to take time, and yet look how late we are in the stages. So that I'm trying to get back.
Thanks, Jim. I want to
Yeah,
get Sammy.
I'm
I
gonna
want to get
yeah,
Sammy in
I'm
here.
gonna stop
Okay.
there. Let me just end. Did you end the share?
Yes, I did. I want to
Okay.
get Sammy in here. Okay. Yes, we've got a limited amount of time, and I want to make sure Sammy gets a chance to talk too. Uh, I do want to talk about a political strategy, and Jeff, I am going to let you talk first because this is what you've been talking about forever. But let's, I want to make sure that both of you get a chance to talk here. One of the hallmarks of your writing and speaking has been to promote a political strategy, Jeff. Explain to us why. I know that you respect protests, flotillas, resolutions, petitions, BDS, humanitarian efforts. Those are all important.
He
But
started the flotilla movement. Don't forget that. He was on the
exactly.
first one.
Exactly. But explain to us why a political strategy is necessary. How does a political approach go beyond BDS and a humanitarian approach, Jeff? And then Sammy, I'm going to ask you the same thing.
Mhm.
All right, I'll do it as briefly as I can. Brief isn't my thing, but you're right. Uh, Look, I start personally. I think we all have to start from the principle that the struggle must be led by Palestinians. And I would go on and say the struggle probably has to be led by Palestinians in Palestine. Obviously, all the Palestinian people are involved in the struggle, but the Palestinians in Palestine both can read their own situation maybe more accurately than people abroad. And at the same time, ironically, Palestinians in Palestine know Israel. And I think any strategy has to be based on how do you strategically um, identify your source. I just wrote a strategy paper about this. How do you strategically identify your sources of strength? Um, and I would say the Palestinians actually have more soft power. Their strategy should be a soft power strategy because they have the support of most of the world that they can play on. Um, but how do you then apply, let me put it this way, how do you identify and attack the major Israeli vulnerabilities? The idea is part of the early part of the process is to cause the collapse of the Zionist regime. That's exactly what the ANC did in South Africa. That's what anti-colonial movements do. Before they go on to their own agenda, you've got to collapse the colonial regime. And Palestinians here, I think, are the only ones. I mean, there's crucial help that can come from abroad, especially Palestinians from abroad, but it has to be led from Palestinians here. And that means then that there has to be three things that are missing. I mean, Sami related to them. One is there has to be an organization because Oslo destroyed the PLO, and now you've got a collaborationist PA. So you're starting from below zero here. Secondly, there has to be a political program. And I'm a part of the One Democratic State campaign. In our view, decolonization means the only possible resolution is one democratic state of equal rights for all its citizens, for everyone living in historic Palestine, and the return of the refugees. And third, you need a strategy. All those things are missing. So, just my last sentence is if this the title of this webinar is solidarity at a time of genocide. So the question is, what can you abroad be doing?
Yeah.
In my view, the most important thing is to help create political space for Palestinians that's safe, that's protected, because the only way those three things, organization, program, and strategy, are going to come into place if the Palestinians can meet and strategize and get to know each other, even all Palestinians from all the segments of the Palestinian community, and begin to bridge their differences, find common thing, and then to develop a political program. That can only happen with outside intervention. That can't happen from inside because the Israeli control and the PA control and suppression is so strong that it prevents any of. And if that can't happen, then there is no possible way of developing, I think, an anti-colonial struggle. So I would say, and we can talk about that later, what that means, but to give Palestinians that space is the most crucial strategic thing that all of us abroad can be doing.
Thanks, Jeff. Sami, I want to ask you the same question, but in this context, in your recent book, The Sacred Awakening, you say that we're stuck in what you call the prevailing consciousness, the thing that consciousness that shapes our thoughts, judgments, our political and social lives. It's rooted in fear, control, and separation. You say it sounds like a spiritual awakening, but you say that it really has political implications. So, talk about this political strategy, but in that context of the prevailing consciousness.
Yeah, I'd like to start by just responding to something that Jeff said. And I
Yeah.
love Jeff and his energy and enthusiasm and urgency in this matter, and I fully agree with it. But one thing I want to also make very, very clear. Palestine is not a political project. We are not a political project. We are a nation. We are indigenous. We are a people group that is deeply rooted in the land that we live in. We are a people that are committed to this land. We are people that are committed to a culture, to a tradition, to a way of life that we have inherited over hundreds and hundreds of years. And so, while fully agreeing that the political project of Palestine is being destroyed, being dismantled, that in no way will hinder and affect how we are as a nation's people, as a people's group that will continue to seek self-determination, will continue to seek rights in whatever system that is created by the colonial system. And this is something that I'm seeing and I'm feeling, and especially when I'm traveling more and more and I'm meeting Palestinians in the diaspora, Palestinian refugees, Palestinians that are living outside, Palestinians that are seeing the situation. Many of them for many years have fallen into the daily life of just surviving in the US and Europe. And now these people are coming back and reclaiming that identity. And I just want to say, just like as we know, the myth of the story of Jews for 3,000 years saying and waking up every day, one day we will be back. This will be the story of the Palestinians as well. So yes, Jeff, like on the political level, we are seeing everything being destroyed around us, but we also have a deep insight on seeing also what the system is. And this fascist system that exists now, called the State of Israel, this fascist ideology called Zionism, as we have seen in many, many situations around the world in history, that system either explodes from the outside or implodes from the inside at some point. This cannot last. And like they're coming as that thing, they're coming to us now, but we know like who's going to be next and who's going to be next to the point where there is nobody except that cancer system will eat itself. So for me, our biggest strategy now, and I think Jeff really put this on the point, is we as Palestinians need to come together. We need to come together, understanding that maybe at this point there isn't a political vision that we could align with. I'm fully for the one state solution. I mean, that's very clear. But who do I say this to? Who do I influence in this? Most Palestinians, as I said before, are in deep resignation and just survival skills. But how do we build on that energy and bringing people together, supporting each other, building community, building sumud, which is the word that everybody uses and everybody knows. I think this is the phase that we're in responding to this colonial system. And so, yes, maybe at this point, out of the 24 different or 25 different solutions that are out there that have been presented, maybe none of them work. And I remember when a journalist once asked me, but the two-state solution is the better solution for you. Wouldn't you rather have your own state and live side by Israel in peace instead of living under apartheid? My response to him is, you need to reframe your question. Your question is, are we being offered a one-state apartheid system or a two-state apartheid system? And if that is the choice, then I choose the one-state apartheid system. And I know that Israel learns lessons from other apartheid and colonial systems. And I know this occupation will go down as one of the most intelligent occupations that has existed in history. But at the same time, I also believe in what it means to be a Palestinian. And more important, as I said before, I also am seeing how the Zionist project is being dismantled globally, and especially in the United States, how there are pastors that are coming out preaching anti-Zionist, anti-Christian Zionist messages, how the young generation is coming out. And so the base of that ideology is being dismantled. To connect to what I write about in the book. In the book, I write about the consciousness of empire, the consciousness of patriarchy, the consciousness of fear and domination that has existed in this world for thousands of years. I mean, history goes back maybe 5,000, and well, Jeff is an anthropologist. He might even know more than me on this. But especially since the Roman Empire, that system of domination and control that we have been living in and facing continuously as a humanity. And for me, while I stay committed to the resistance and the resiliency as a Palestinian, the question I am also asking myself all the time is a free Palestine. What does that look like? Why should we even assume that a free Palestine will be one that will be democratic, that will be uh, accepting of all kinds of people in it, that it would be pluralistic, that it would honor minorities in it. And for me, I think part of the struggle that I want to engage in is to understand that there is the urgency of the matter of what we're doing, but to understand that as a humanity, we are living in systems of oppression in every aspect of our life. We are living in fear in every aspect of our life. And there has to be at some point a shift in our consciousness that says, no, there is a better way for humanity out there to live. And I think this is where, like for me, I focus a lot on Jesus and his teachings in this, because Jesus was talking about kingdom, the vision of the kingdom. The kingdom is here, the kingdom is within you. And we all understand what, even though it's a little bit now seen as a patriarchal term, the word kingdom itself, but to understand what he was meaning, that love, life, justice, celebration is here now, healing is here now. But at the same time, he did not shun away from challenging the systems and the structures of oppression. That's why he went into the temple. That's why he turned the tables over in the temple, because he wanted to challenge empire directly. So for me, our transformational work is how are we also ushering in a vision of real justice and peace. And if we say in this land where we live, to really begin to ask the question, what is a real vision of justice and peace? Not just liberation, a real vision of justice and peace looks like. And I think Jeff in his book points out to what that looks like. And how do we move in this vision? How do we begin to live that vision today as if it is happening? That's why having lunch with Jeff yesterday is for me an expression of living that vision in this land? And at the same time, how are we coming together to topple the systems and the structures of oppression that are preventing this from happening? And I want to say these systems and structures don't just exist in this land. They exist even in Indiana, Michael. They exist in Washington, D.C. They exist in London. We are seeing what's happening in the US. I was recently on a speaking tour in the US and just seeing how this consciousness of empire and domination and fear and control and manipulation has become so embedded within American psyche as well. The hatred that people have towards each other is so deep within American psyche. Most Americans don't see it, but they're going to wake up one day and it's going to be right on their front doors. And so my talk in the US, the main theme that I was talking about was from occupation to empire. We need to begin to understand that this is the consciousness of empire that we need to topple, the machine that feeds what is happening here. It's not just about Americans protesting free Palestine every once in a while and thinking they've done their job. It's understand that it is the United States, the military industrial complex, Congress, the White House, these are the ones that are doing the damage here. And it's not going to change by us doing elections every 2 or 4 years, hoping that a candidate will come, as maybe the right candidates will continue to come. But it is again a shift in the consciousness of domination and empire and resisting those systems within the US itself.
I want to ask you, thank you, Sammy. I want to ask you both about the next generation of leaders. Sammy, one of one of the things that you're doing these days, as part of your work with Nonviolence International, is training the next generation of Palestinian leaders and others. Tell us about that. But also, are you finding allies among your present Palestinian leadership, and also among Israeli activists?
Well, I would say my focus is on the Palestinian community. My 100% focus and intention is within the Palestinian community. As you know, for many years, I engaged in joint spaces, joint work, joint resistance,
Sure.
dialogue spaces. And after October 7th, one thing that I realized is that I disconnected from my roots, and sometimes I bent backwards to try to please and appease the activists from the other side. And this is something that I want to step out of. And so since that time, I said my focus, my intention when it comes to this situation is the Palestinians, working with Palestinians, encouraging Palestinians, inviting Palestinians to discussions. And one of the projects I'm very proud of, and if there are any Palestinians in the space, they are more than welcome to contact me. It's for Palestinians only. It is called the Palestinian Councils. And this
Say that
project,
again. Say that again. The
Palestinian Councils.
councils.
Councils, not the Palestinian National Council, Palestinian Councils. And it is the councils that, again, bring us back to the council of the indigenous communities, how people sit in indigenous communities around the world, sitting in circles, coming together, sharing, grieving, learning about our history, sharing our stories, building trust with each other, beginning to ask these questions that we're asking today, but not from a debate point of view, views and positions. What can we do now as Palestinians? And we have these councils being created in Palestine, in the 67 and 48 occupied territories, and also in the diaspora as well. And so this is the work that I'm doing. And of course, trusting that the next generation of youth, as much as they are also living the despair that the rest of the community is living, that there is energy in the youth and there is something that can arise in this movement. And of course, another point that has been destroyed, I would say, even by the Oslo peace process, is the voice of women leaders within the Palestinian community. And I'm seeing women leaders begin to really step up and emerge in different aspects of Palestinian culture and political liberation life as well. And so there's always a movement happening. There is always something that is happening in this land. Again, like I say, in many indigenous countries that have experienced colonialism. And one point that I also want to end up in saying that when we say Palestinian here, we've been talking West Bank, Gaza, West Bank, Gaza. Let us not forget the majority of Palestinians that live in the 1948 occupied territories that have been living under their form of apartheid and occupation. And I believe, and this is something I was sharing with Jeff yesterday, my hope, let me say, is that, at the end of the day, a Jewish state means Jewish only, and anybody who is not Jewish will be second, third class citizen. And at some point, in political theory, we studied something called revolution of rising expectation. Expectations at some point will reach a point where we cannot maintain what we have, and we will resist, and we will boycott, and we will engage, and we will protest. And so that protest movement, I think, will continue to happen. And with the rising Palestinian population in this land, creating more connections between Palestinians and this land, that unity will bring that nation together. And hopefully that nation will then allow for a real, authentic leadership to emerge.
Thanks, Sami. Jeff, young Israeli activists have always been a part of ICAD's work. Are you still finding young leaders in the Israeli left? And what about any young Palestinian leaders with whom you're working?
Well, overall, first of all, the relationship between Israeli um, activists, I don't know, let's say Israeli anti-colonial, even anti-Zionist people, and which is very few, who are very few, and who are the partners that Sami would work with. And the Palestinians, it's a very fraught and difficult relationship. I just to say this because I think it's important. I think there's two parallel struggles going on that we have to look at. They're intertwined, but they're very different. The first one is the Palestinian struggle for liberation. This is exactly what I think Sami is talking about. It's a Palestinian struggle. It has to do with Palestinian life and culture and how they see their future and their people. And I have nothing to do with that. I have nothing to say about it. I have no right. I'm not Palestinian. That's their struggle, and they have to define what their end goals. There's a term in Arabic, thawabit. Their first principles. The non-negotiable uh, framework in which they have to define their own future and their own lives, and that's their job. But then it has to go somewhere. And as even look, I'm a settler too. I mean, settler colonialism means that I'm a settler, of course. And when Sami says, he doesn't like to use the word settlers, to have to do with the West Bank settlers, I would go the other way, and I would say we should expand it because all Israelis are settlers. I mean, the whole idea,
True.
that's the normalization. You see, when we talk about settlers, settler violence, right? What everybody understands is we're talking about West Bank people. What about the Israelis living in Tel Aviv? They're not settlers.
Mhm.
I'm a settler. I'm what I call myself. I define myself in my book as a settler who refuses, meaning that I accept that, but I'm working to end that condition and try to earn my place in Palestine together with the Palestinians. Because in the end, both of these peoples are going to have to be here. So the second struggle, we have nothing to do with Palestinian liberation, but the second struggle is how together do we construct the post-colonial state and society that we want to live in. And in that anti-colonial struggle, that has to be a joint struggle. That isn't only a Palestinian struggle. And here I think we're equal. We're equal in that struggle. And this again is based on the idea that the struggle and the anti-colonial form that it takes is based on the Palestinian liberation struggle. So, in other words, that kind of creates the framework, it creates the basis around which then we begin to create a more inclusive post-colonial reality, one civil society. So, how to insert myself in the struggle as an Israeli Jew. And I'm trying to insert myself into the anti-colonial part, which is why strategy is so important to me. But I really have to be careful not to insert myself where I don't belong into the Palestinians' own struggle for liberation. So having said that, I think I don't know. Um, I don't want to be judgmental, but one of the problems with the young, well, with the Israelis in general, the young ones, the ones that are anti-Zionist, let's say, or they don't even go that far, so they don't really think it through. Um, there's a lack of analysis. I mean, that's is on our part. There are no forums in the left in Israel. The left is very small. The anti-Zionist left is tiny. I can give you their names almost. Um, they're very good people, very conscientious. They're out there. There's a lot of Israeli activists in the Jordan Valley, in other parts of the West Bank, fighting settler violence. I mean, they're doing really, really important stuff. I'm not taking away from that. But the problem is it remains on the level of activism. It's not political in any way. There's no forums of discussion. There's no discussion among the Israeli left in terms of what I just said. What's our relationship with Palestinians? What's our role in the struggle? Is there a struggle? None of that is going on. And I don't know, uh, what to do about that. But I think that I think it's not only here, maybe it's generational. And that is this whole idea of activists. I mean, I don't know anybody in the colonial world, or even us in the 60s, that used to call ourselves activists. I mean, activist is a very reactionary term. It means you're being an activist about something. You don't have a plan, you don't have a program, you don't have a strategy, none of that. If you just do your activism, and I think activism comes out of neoliberalism. It's all about me. And so I'll give you, even if I'm an Israeli, committed activist, I'll give you a couple hours a week. I'll go to the Jordan Valley. I'll do the fight, and then leave me alone. During the week, I got my own life. I'm a student, I'm working, whatever. And then next week I'll go out again. So it's very hard to build a movement around that. And I think it's not necessarily an Israeli problem. Maybe it's a neoliberal and a generational problem. But I have to say that we have almost no comrades. ICAD does its work, and there are young Israelis, of course, that are part of it. I mean, a lot of the young activists grew up on our office and so on, were our tour guides, worked with us, and so on. But it's not strategic. The Israeli left is not strategic at all, and
Yeah.
that's part of the problem.
Can I add to that? I think it's a
Sure,
very, very
Sammy.
important point that Jeff is saying because this is the same thing also with us within the resistance movement. I think one of the also failures of the Oslo peace process is that it confined us into two forms of how to engage. The first form is pushing the idea of conflict resolution and dialogue, what that Jeff talked about. We didn't have conflict and resolution and dialogue in the 80s. When Israelis came to Beit Sahur, when Israelis came to Palestine, when the Israelis they came to be part of the resistance. They came to ask, what do you want? How can we serve you? And what can we do? I was a young kid at that time, and I met many Israelis who this is their thing. They didn't come to debate with us strategy and tactics and what to do and what not to do, and then putting also their fears, their agenda, their sense of acceptance or not, how they push the line or not within Israeli society as a check. They came and were ready. But that shifted the Oslo peace process brought negotiations at the political level and brought dialogue, which became the main tool of how we engage between each other. This really came the idea of dialogue, and millions, if not billions of dollars were poured by the international community into creating dialogue spaces. Have them sit, have them dialogue, and of course dialogue that was restricted to how can we both agree on the agenda of the two-state solution in Oslo. It wasn't about dialogue in the real sense. It was let them
Yeah.
come together and promote in their communities the two-state solution. The second aspect of what happened in Oslo is our resistance moved, and this is the point that Jeff was making, moved from proactive to reaction. Most of our what we call resistance, most of what we call nonviolence, and I've been in part of this since before Oslo and until this day, we are reacting to what the other side is doing. And that doesn't work. It can help, it can prevent violence to a certain degree, it can maybe salvage or save maybe a house from demolition, maybe a field of trees from being uprooted, maybe 99% of the time. That even doesn't work. But nonviolence, and I think this is where I fully agree. I think this is what I hope this is the point Jeff is making is we are reacting. And reaction is not a strategy. You don't do strategy by reacting. What we had developed again before the Oslo peace process began, with my uncle Mubarak and many others who were part of leading the nonviolence movement, is proactive, asking what is the end goal that we want to reach, and how the resistance is movement to break the obstacles that are preventing us from reaching that end goal. And most of the Israelis, with my deep respect for them, that come now into Area C of the occupied territories, are coming to prevent or to protect, to react to the violence by the Jewish gangs. And I fully agree with you. Every Jew is a settler, but the focus on this particular group being labeled settlers is a way of escapism, but that most Israelis do. But to protect, to react to what? A shift again, this consciousness shift. How can we move into proactive, where proactive means also dismantling the systems and the structures that allow the violence to take place? This is a core of nonviolence that we have missed. And again, it takes the three things that we're talking about. It takes a vision, the end goal, where we want to reach. It takes leadership that are committed to achieving that goal, and it takes a strategy. And sadly, now, I think in the movement that we have in both of our communities, this is something that is missing.
Guys, I'm aware of the time. I want to ask you one more question before we close, and I want you to respond. Jeff, you talked about creating, I mean, both of you get to the U.S. Jeff, you were born here. Sami, you've been here recently. You spent a lot of time, both of you, in the U.S. Jeff, you talked about creating political space. Many of the folks here who are attending this are from the U.S. They're activists here in their own right, in their own communities. They want to make a difference. Talk to us about what we can do here to create this political space, this resistance space, this human rights space. I mean, talk to us about what we can do here to help move the process along. Jeff and then Sami.
Well, I think one of the problems is that there's a disconnect between, let's say, the United States, not only the United States, the Palestinian solidarity movement and the groups that support Palestinian rights and so on, and the Palestinians themselves. I mean, it has to do a little bit with what we've talked about, is that there isn't really an address here. There isn't, if you're in Indiana and you want to know what do the Palestinians need? What are their priorities? What should our agenda be? There's very few people to ask about that. I think that's true. But I think that's what has to happen. I think we're in a situation today where a lot of groups abroad, with a lot of resources, I mean, I just heard that the Jewish Voice for Peace got $11 million from somewhere, but there's church groups. I mean, there's a lot of groups that have a lot of resources that actually have political connections and that have good connections to the Palestinians, but they set their own agendas. No one asks the Palestinians, as far as I can see. Sami, maybe you correct me. What are your priorities? What do you need? Now, I think it would be helpful if Palestinians would also communicate that back and to say, look, this is a situation we're in. We need this and this and this. That doesn't happen enough. But at the same time, there should be more reaching out, because Palestinians here, like Sami says, are really in a survival mode. They don't really have the space to kind of sit back and strategize and write to people and talk. I think the responsibility lies on organizations abroad. Part of the support is soliciting from the Palestinians what their needs are, not waiting for them to tell us. And I'll just give you one example that I don't know people might get mad at me, but just an example. We just had the flotilla that was intercepted yesterday, 1,000 kilometers away from here, literally. Well, one question is, and I was on the first flotilla, so I'm not anti-flotilla. It's very, and the intention was important. But the question is, who decided to do a flotilla? I mean, was there any tie into Palestinians? Did anybody say to the Palestinians here in Palestine, given everything going on, is this a priority that you think we should invest in? I mean, who decided to do that? And secondly, of course, it takes a lot of organization, it takes a lot of money and resources to do something like that. So another part of the question is would those resources and efforts have been better used, given the dire situation of Palestinians here, in other ways? You know, uh, you know, for example, Palestinian communities being attacked are desperate to remain. They don't have, they're losing their flocks. Money to help them buy more sheep and goats that have been stolen by settlers would really help. Money for fuel in the winter. That people get cold, they don't have the money for fuel. I mean, there are material needs of Palestinians that aren't being addressed really in a systematic way. And instead, groups abroad are using tremendous amounts of resources on agendas that I don't know how related they are to the Palestinian issue. So I think that's one thing. And the second thing I'll just say really quick is again this idea of political space. I think, for example, churches have retreats. I mean, they always do retreats, and they have resources. Mike, you and I talked about this before. You know, uh, for example, to have a church make their site available in Indiana, in some farm somewhere or whatever, and invite 30 Palestinians and let the Palestinians decide who they are from all parts of the Palestinian world to come together for a week. Only Palestinians sitting together for a week because then they get a chance to get to know each other and so on from the camps, the diaspora from 48, from Gaza, from the West Bank, from everywhere, to sit down together and really begin to think together with the agenda being, if not one state, at least, where are we going politically? And to replicate that, to have meetings all over there's groups all over the world that could sponsor that, or not in Indiana, bring them to Cyprus, bring them to Jordan, Turkey, somewhere, but somewhere where they can all meet because they can't meet today. That, again, for me, at least in my view, is the most urgent thing to allow this national dialogue to carry on among the Palestinian people. That conditions don't allow that today. Well, that's something that I would put resources into, to tell you the truth, instead of a flotilla.
Yeah.
Because I think but see, nobody is thinking of, there is no connection, almost, maybe personal, but organizationally, between the solidarity groups abroad and the Palestinians here in Palestine. And I think that's the most urgent thing that has to be bridged.
Thanks, Jeff. Sammy?
Yeah, I mean, one thing for sure, this round of the flotilla, Jeff, is the one where all the groups that have engaged in the flotilla in the past, that have argued and disagreed with each other and maybe even fought each other, have come together. And many of them are led by Palestinians who are, again, diaspora or inside, they are part of the Palestinian community, are part of that identity. And I asked the same question as you many times, and I also love the answer that isn't within me and also within this community, that we are doing something. And when we say resources, there's enough resources for the flotilla and enough resources for everything else that you mentioned. So it's not an either or. I think if we really engage in this, we could really, really bring the resources. For me, also, it's very important to say that, as you said, Jeff, and as we all know, the Palestinians living in the land, and the trauma that we're experiencing, and the division that we have within our own community, and the lack of trust that we have with each other, and the lack of vision, is putting us really in a situation where we might not be able to say, yes, this is what we need, and this is how we need to behave. There are some of us that are doing this. There are some of us that are trying to support the global solidarity movement. But at the end of the day, and Michael, because you've studied Desmond Tutu maybe more than me, I think he has this example. If somebody has their foot on somebody's head, you don't go to that person and ask, "What do you want me to do for you?" You do everything you can to remove the leg or the foot from that person's head. And I would say there is enough information, there is enough resources out there. There has been enough that has been shown to the global community of what this Zionist entity is doing to Palestinians that most people now are, they know enough and are ignoring. They are ignoring. They can do something. There are boycott campaigns. There are apps that people can download on their phone that can tell you what products to buy and not to buy. And it's not just even about the situation in Palestine. It's any product that supports or endorses genocide or war or child slavery or destruction of nature in different areas. So there are things that people can do. If I feel something and I see something and I say, wow, this is moving me, instead of just, turning to the next thing on my Instagram, I can do something. There is enough resources out there for people to search and to engage. Again, we need the leadership. We need the vision. And Palestinians take a brunt of this responsibility. But the people that have seen what is happening in Palestine know what's happening. And if just those people alone begin to do something, begin to refuse to pay taxes, begin to boycott, begin to push, begin to picket, begin to boycott and picket churches that are Christian Zionists. I think this is one of the first and big things that we need to do is to dismantle that ideology in the US. We will see. We will begin to see change happen. And initially, yes, it's difficult and few people will start, but then the ball will get rolling and more people will join as they see energy move in these spaces.
Thanks, Sami. I'm going to let Sami and Jeff have the last word, but before I do, I just want to remind you that this webinar has been sponsored by Indiana Center for Middle East Peace and ICAD USA. And also, if you'd like more information about our In the Footsteps of Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela tour to South Africa, with a special emphasis on South Africa's solidarity with Palestine, then contact me and you can see that information in the chat. Mike, finally, a reminder that this webinar was recorded, and in a few days it'll be YouTube on our Indiana Center for Middle East Peace YouTube channel, on the ICAD website, and in our ICAD USA newsletter. So, parting words, Sami?
I I just want to honor this man in front of me named Jeff Halper. That's my parting words. I don't know how long I've known him. I don't want to, I want to compare ages to this, but for me, the energy, the insistency, the consistency that he has shown throughout the years, in times where he was attacked, in times when he was put aside, is something that I take very dear to my heart, and I really honor him as a friend. And for me, he is a model. He is a model of what is possible. And for me, I honor also the generations of Israelis, of Jews that are learning from him and coming out with that same energy as well. And very thankful for you, Michael, for all the people around the world that have been in this for years. I know times when we would have meetings and two or three people will show up, or have a demonstration, five people will show up. That number is growing. And so we shouldn't be in any despair, even with everything that is happening. The more the numbers grow, the more the possibility of change, the more that change happened, the more we will not go back to what was. So very thankful for Jeff, for you, and for all the people that are really engaging in this work and in the trenches of it.
We're looking forward to seeing you in June, Sami, when we're in Bethlehem. I remember marching with you at the first Christ at the Checkpoint Conference in a demonstration outside Bethlehem. And you've been a long, long time friend since the year 2000 when we first met. So it's good to be with you today. Thanks. Jeff.
Well, thank you, Sami, for those kind words. Yeah, it's important, that we support each other and work together. I mean, Sami's work is very conscientious, and he doesn't really know how much I'm pinning my political expectations on Sami. Not on Sami really, but really it's on Sami and other young Palestinians to move this forward. They're the people that I'm really focused on trying to work with today. And if you are critical, if you are political, it is lonely sometimes. I have to admit, it's lonely. You feel very isolated. And so the fact that you have comrades, and that's a very rich word, I think, like Sami really makes it important. And you too, Mike. Just to admit something, Mike is also the chairman of ICAD UK. So it's not only the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace. I guess what I would just end on is ICAD itself. I mean, I am a part of a wider organization that's called ICAD. We took the Israeli part out of our name for obvious reasons. We're called ICAD these days. We still focus on house demolitions as one of our major issues, but we go much beyond that because we've always been a political organization. So what I would ask you to do or recommend that you do is look at our website. Our website is very rich as a resource. I mean, there's maps and there's materials and there's analysis and there's really all kinds of for years and years and years. So if you go into it, you really find kind of a history especially from a critical Israeli point of view, which is interesting, and important, an unusual angle to all of this, because ICAD's idea was to magnify the anti-Zionist Israeli voice that is sort of left out sometimes of the discussion, since it's very few. And Mike has mentioned his tours. ICAD also runs tours. Linda Ramsden, who's the head of ICAD UK, organizes them, 11-day study tours that are great. Sami is often a part of them. We have a tour, I think, coming up in November. But if you look at our website, you can get all that information as well. And I would add that to the list of things that are important. I think Palestinians really are asking for people to actually come to Palestine in solidarity. I think that would break the isolation. That would give them a feeling of empowerment. And I think you often hear from Palestinians saying, we really appreciate your actually being here with us, so that our tours aren't only study tours that I think are good for you, but I think they're really important, our presence among the Palestinians. So look at our website and especially think about coming on one of our tours.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Sami. Jeff, I was going to mention the website, so I'm glad that you did that. Come and see, go and tell. That's the Palestinian invitation. And Jeff, you've been a longtime friend as well, more than 20 years. And the two of you together really are important voices. And so I'm glad that we had the two of you together on this webinar. And I should just mention that Sami and Jeff and ICAD USA are in conversations about having a U.S. tour with the two of them early in 2027, sometime in February or March. So keep an eye out for that. Check out the ICAD website. And I just want to say thanks to Sami, thanks to Jeff, and thanks to all of you for joining us today.